New York City mayoral primary set to take place next month. Scott Stringer was seen as a potential representative for the left in the race, but his support appears to have weakened after sexual misconduct allegations made by a former 2001 campaign worker. Not really a campaign worker, though. She, according to people at the time, was a friend of his and unpaid and sometimes did some campaign work. Anyway, some on the left have pulled their support for Stringer, but New York Congressman Jerry Nadler says they are overlooking what can happen if a more progressive figure became mayor.
And I think the ones who've abandoned Scott are the ones who haven't been around long enough to see what can happen. We're inexperienced. So I'm very disappointed in them, but it doesn't change things.
Daniel Marans, political reporter, HuffPost. He joins us now to discuss. All right, Dan, so state of the New York mayoral race. Where are we? What's going on?
Well, it's a very interesting race right now. Obviously, New York City has sent something like 5 or 6 socialist-backed candidates to the state legislature in Albany. It's elected Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Jamal Bowman in the Bronx. And now we're looking at a mayoral race where the top 2 contenders are a former police captain and an entrepreneur, both of whom are firmly in the anti-defund the police corner, both of whom are seen as cozy with the city's business community, and both of whom happen to also be people of color. The former cop is Eric Adams. He's the Brooklyn Borough president. He's black, and of course, the entrepreneur to whom I'm referring is Andrew Yang. And so we have this very interesting situation where New York City, the largest city in the country, city of 8.5 million people, is now staring down the barrel of really shifting, at least in a New York City context, slightly to the right. I'm glad we played that clip. Obviously, the guy that everybody thought was the most realistic progressive contender was the city comptroller, Scott Stringer. He's somebody who had at times had a more moderate history, but in general, he divested the city pension funds from fossil fuel companies and from private prisons. He was seen as having a good shot, and a lot of progressive support consolidated behind him. A lot of that has now left him, of course, and people are talking about a return to, in some ways, a Bloomberg style of governance in New York City. And I think it has really interesting implications for maybe the limits of left-wing power, even in a place like New York City at this present moment. And some of the trends we're seeing, I think, in terms of backlash to crime and other issues.
Mm-hmm. What did you make of Yang made the following comments with regards to Israel and Palestine? He said, "I'm standing with the people of Israel who are coming under bombardment attacks and condemn the Hamas terrorists. The people of New York City will always stand with our brothers and sisters in Israel who face down terrorism and persevere." Obviously, no mention there of the incredibly disproportionate attacks by Israel on Palestinians, including, multiple scores of children have been killed there. He then had to walk that back, but not before there was a major backlash. AOC called him out, etc. Do you see any sign that would hurt him in the polls? Or does this further bolster his credibility with Orthodox Jewish communities that have appeared to be supportive of his candidacy?
Yeah, so I would quibble that he didn't quite walk it back. I mean, if you look at his statement, he really just said the word Palestinians and said he regrets their loss of life as well, and that there's a way for him to do that without really fundamentally changing what is a very, very classic pro-Israel establishment type narrative, that this is purely self-defense. It doesn't really bring in the context of, the Israeli occupation and some of the practices that even many Israelis are very critical of. I think that, look, there's a couple different things here. He can say all this, and there's virtually no policy implications other than maybe trade visits or something like that.
Right,
At the end of the day, this is a municipal public policy position. And so you look at New York City, which has the largest Jewish community of any locality in the world outside of Israel, maybe outside of the Tel Aviv metro. And there is, of course, a young contingent of young liberals, often secular-leaning Jews who are extremely passionate in their criticism of Israel, even at times in their rejection of the very idea of Zionism, of the very idea of a Jewish ethno-state. But at the end of the day, the people for whom this is a do or die issue, the people for whom this is a thing that they still vote on and see as a proxy for alliance to Jewish concerns, I think still heavily outnumber those folks. And what's more, they often vote as a bloc. You've seen him lock up support from key ultra-Orthodox groups, many of whom have a complicated relationship with the ideology behind Israel, but are overall more sympathetic to Israel, and lawmakers. And at the end of the day, he's building a moderate coalition in the city of outer borough, Asian Americans, ethnic whites, small business owners, working class Latinos, and Orthodox Jews. That's the coalition he's building. And I think one thing that he's realized, and I think it's smart of him politically, is you pick a lane. In New York City, there's a moderate lane and there's basically a progressive or a left lane, and varying flavors within those different lanes. But it would not be, I mean, it almost strikes me as a little lacking in confidence to even double back. I mean, look, he got some grief for it when he went to Astoria, and that's good. That's healthy. That's part of New York City's voice as well. There is a vibrant Arab American community, a vibrant South Asian and Muslim community, as well as just generally people who are more pro-Palestinian. But for now, I don't, frankly, probably unfortunately, I don't think that's a bad calculation for him.
Yeah, and so final question for you, Dan, is it Yang's race to lose right now? What do you think? And what do the people in the race think?
I think that it's a very, look, we have the first debate tonight between these candidates. We have TV ads that are just coming on the air. We're heading into the final month. I think it's Yang and Adams. Eric Adams, a guy who does not have a huge Twitter following, issued the same type of statement about Israel, though, and is really courting the same coalition, though he has a working class black base and a lot more support from organized labor. They have pretty similar positions on policing, though Adams saying Yang is sort of a Johnny-come-lately to that position. And I think, we will see, I think, just how well-oiled a machine either campaign is in terms of management. I think that Adams has sort of the classic old New York City machine style patronage, you give me a favor, I do you a favor style of politics, whereas Yang is more of a tech disruptor kind of feel. And I don't know if that's enough to carry him. Will Yang break through enough with the city's multiracial working class, or is his national media presence enough to carry him? If I were a betting man, I might put it ever so slightly on Yang, but only ever so slightly.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Dan, great
Thanks,
to see
man.
you.
Appreciate it.
Great to be here, guys.
More Rising for you after this.